Chapter 6: The Growth of Thought. Observation and its Value. The first requisite for competent thinking is attentive and accurate observation. The self as knower must observe the not-self with attention and with accuracy, if it is to become the known, and thus merge in the self. The second requisite is receptivity and tenacity in the mental body, the power of yielding quickly to impressions and of retaining them when made. In proportion to the attention and accuracy of the knower's observation and the receptivity and tenacity of his mental body will be the rapidity of his evolution, the speed at which his latent potencies become active powers. If the knower have not accurately observed the thought image, or if the mental body, being undeveloped, has been insensitive to all but the stronger vibrations of an external object, and so has been modified into an imperfect reproduction, the material for thought is inadequate and misleading. The broad outline is at first all that is obtained, the details being blurred or even omitted. As we evolve our faculties, and as we build finer stuff into the mental body, we find that we receive from the same external object much more than we received in our undeveloped days. Thus we find much more in an object than we before found in it. Let two men stand in a field, in presence of a splendid sunset. Let one of these be an undeveloped agricultural laborer, who has not been in the habit of observing nature, save with reference to his crops, who has only looked at the sky to see if it promises rain or sunshine, caring nothing for its aspects, save as they bear on his own livelihood and employment. Let the second be an artist, a painter of genius, full of the love of beauty, and trained to see and enjoy every shade and tone of color. The laborer's physical, astral, and mental bodies are all in presence of that gorgeous sunset, and all the vibrations caused by it are playing upon the vehicles of his consciousness. He sees different colors in the sky, and observes that there is much red, promising a fine day for the morrow, good or bad for his crops, as the case may be. This is all he gets out of it. The painter's physical, astral, and mental bodies are all exposed to exactly the same pulsations as those of the laborer, but how different is the result! The fine material of his bodies reproduces a million vibrations too rapid and subtle to move the coarse material of the other. His image of the sunset is consequently quite different from the image produced in the laborer. The delicate shades of color, hue melting into hue, translucent blue and rose and palest green, lighted with golden gleams and flecked with royal purple, all these are tasted with a lingering joy, an ecstasy of sensuous delight. There are waked all fine emotions, love and admiration merging into reverence and joy that such beauty can be. Ideas of the most inspiring character arise, as the mental body modifies itself under the vibrations playing on it on the mental plane from the mental aspect of the sunset. The difference of the images is not due to an external cause, but to an internal receptivity. It does not lie in the outside, but in the capacity to respond. It is not in the not-self, but in the self and its sheaths. According to these differences is the result produced. How little flows into the one, how much into the other. Here we see with startling force the meaning of the evolution of the knower. A universe of beauty may be around us, its waves playing on us from every side, and yet for us it may be non-existent. Everything that is in the mind of the Logos of our system is playing on us and on our bodies now. How much of it we can receive marks the stage of our evolution. What is wanted for growth is not a change without us, but a change within us. Everything is already given us, but we have to develop the capacity to receive. It will be gathered from what has just been said that one element in clear thinking is accurate observation. We have to begin this work on the physical plane, where our bodies come into contact with the not-self. We climb upwards, and all evolution begins on the lower plane and passes on into the higher. On the lower we first touch the external world, and thence the vibrations pass upwards or inwards, calling out the inner powers. Accurate observation, then, is a faculty to be definitely cultivated. Most people go through the world with their eyes half closed, and we can each test this for ourselves by questioning ourselves on what we have observed while passing along a street. We can ask, "What have I observed while walking down this street?" Many persons will have observed next to nothing, no clear images have been formed. Others will have observed a few things, some will have observed many. It is related by Houdin that he trained his child in observing the contents of the shops he passed, walking along the streets of London until he could give the whole contents of a shop front which he had passed by without stopping, having thrown over it a mere glance. The normal child and the savage are observant, and according to the extent of their capacity for observation is the measure of their intelligence. The habit of clear, quick observation lies in the average man at the root of clear thinking. Those who think most confusedly are generally those who observe least accurately, except where intelligence is highly developed and is turned inwards habitually, and the bodies have not been trained in the way spoken of below. But the answer to the above question may be, "I was thinking of something else and therefore did not observe." And the answer is a good one if the answerer was thinking of something more important than the training of the mental body and of the power of attention by careful observation. Such a one may have done well in his lack of observation. But if the answerer has only been dreaming, drifting about aimlessly, then he has wasted his time and much more than if he had turned his energy outwards. A man deeply engaged in thought will be unobservant of passing objects, turned inwards and not outwards, and will not attend to what is going on before him. It may not be worth his while, in this life, to train his bodies to make quasi-independent observations, for the highly developed and the partially developed need different training. But how many of the unobservant people are really deeply engaged in thought? In most people's minds, all that is going on is an idle looking at any thought image that happens to present itself, a turning over of the contents of the mind in an aimless fashion, as an idle woman turns over the contents of her wardrobes or her jewel box. This is not thinking, for thinking means, as we have seen, the establishing of relations, the adding of something not previously present. In thinking, the attention of the knower is deliberately directed to the thought images, and he exerts himself actively upon them. The development, then, of the habit of observation is part of the training of the mind, and those who practice it will find that the mind becomes clearer, increases in power, and becomes more easily manageable, so that they can direct it on any given object much better than they had been able previously to do. Now, this power of observation, once definitely established, works automatically, the mental and other bodies registering images which are available if wanted later without calling at the time on the attention of their owner. It is then no longer necessary that the attention of the person should be directed to objects presented to the sense organs in order that an impression of those objects may be made and preserved. A very trivial but significant case of this kind happened in my own experience. While I was traveling in America, a question arose one day about the number on the engine of a train by which we had been traveling. The number was instantly presented to me by my mind. But this was not in any sense a case of clairvoyance. For clairvoyant perception it would have been necessary to have hunted up the train and looked for the number. Without any conscious action on my part, the sense organs, senses, and mind had observed and registered the number as the train came into the station, and when the number was wanted, the mental image of the incoming train, with the number on the front of the engine, at once came up. This faculty, once established, is a useful one, for it means that when things that have been passing around you have not attracted your attention at the time, you can none the less recall them by looking at the record which the mental, astral, and physical bodies have made of them on their own account. This automatic activity of the mental body, outside the conscious activity of the jiva, goes on, however, more extensively in all of us than might be supposed, for it has been found that when a person is hypnotized, he will report a number of small events which had passed him by without arousing his attention. These impressions reach the mental body through the brain, and are impressed on the latter as well as on the former. Many impressions thus reach the mental body that are not sufficiently deep to enter into consciousness, not because consciousness cannot cognize them, but because it is not normally awake enough to notice any but the deeper impressions. In the hypnotic trance, in delirium, in physical dreams, when the jiva is away, the brain yields up these impressions, which are usually overpowered by the far stronger impressions received by and made by the jiva himself. But if the mind is trained to observe and record, then the jiva can recover from it, at will, the impressions thus made. Thus, if two people walk down the street, one trained in observation and the other not, both would receive a number of impressions, and neither might be conscious of the receipt of these at the time, but afterwards the trained observer would be able to recover these impressions, while the other would not. As this power lies at the root of clear thinking, those who desire to culture and control thought power would do well to cultivate the habit of observation, and to sacrifice the mere pleasure of drifting idly along whithersoever the stream of fancy may carry them. The evolution of mental faculties. As images accumulate, the work of the knower becomes more complicated, and his activity upon them draws out one power after another, inherent in his divine nature. He no longer accepts the external world only in its simple relation to himself, as containing objects that are causes of pleasure or pain to himself, but he arranges side by side the images representing them, studies them in their various aspects, shifts them about, and reconsiders them. He begins also to arrange his own observations. He observes, when one image brings up another, the order of their succession. When a second has followed a first many times, he begins to look for the second when the first appears, and thus links the two together. This is his first attempt at reasoning, and here again we have the calling out of an inherent faculty. He argues that because A and B have always appeared successively, therefore, when A appears, B will appear. This forecast being continually verified, he comes to link them together as cause and effect, and many of his early errors are due to a too hasty establishment of this relation. Further, setting images side by side, he observes their unlikenesses and likenesses, and develops a power of comparison. He chooses one or another as pleasure-giving, and moves the body in search of them in the external world, developing judgment by these selections and their consequences. He evolves a sense of proportion in relation to the likenesses and unlikenesses, and groups objects together by their prominent likenesses, separating them from others by their prominent unlikenesses. Here also he makes many errors, corrected by later observations, being easily misled at first by surface similarities. Thus observation, discrimination, reason, comparison, judgment are evolved one after another, and these faculties grow with exercise, and thus the aspect of the self as knower is developed by the activity of thoughts, by the action and reaction continually repeated between the self and the not-self. To quicken the evolution of these faculties, we must deliberately and consciously exercise them, using the circumstances of daily life as opportunities for developing them. Just as we saw that the power of observation might be trained in everyday life, so can we accustom ourselves to see the points of likeness and unlikeness in the objects round us. We can draw conclusions and test them by events. We can compare and judge, and all this consciously and of set purpose. Thought power grows rapidly under this deliberate exercise, and becomes a thing that is consciously wielded, felt as a definite possession. The training of the mind. To train the mind in any one direction is to train it altogether to some extent, for any definite kind of training organizes the mind stuff of which the mental body is composed, and also calls out some of the powers of the knower. The increased capacity can be directed to any end, and is available for all purposes. A trained mind can be applied to a new subject, and will grapple with it and master it in a way impossible to the untrained, and this is the use of education. But it should always be remembered that the training of the mind does not consist in cramming it with facts, but in drawing out its powers. The mind does not grow by being gorged with other people's thoughts, but by exercising its own faculties. It is said of the great teachers who stand at the head of human evolution that they know everything which exists within the solar system. This does not mean that every fact therein is always within their consciousness, but that they have so developed the aspect of knowledge in themselves that whenever they turn their attention in any direction, they know the object to which it is turned. This is a much greater thing than the storage in the mind of any number of facts, as it is a greater thing to see any object on which the eye is turned than to be blind and to know it only by the description given of it by others. The evolution of the mind is measured not by the images it contains, but by the development of the nature which is knowledge, the power to reproduce within itself anything that is presented to it. This will be as useful in any other universe as in this, and once gained is ours to use wherever we may be. Association with superiors. Now, this work of training the mind may be very much helped forward by coming into touch with those who are more highly evolved than ourselves. A thinker who is stronger than we are can materially aid us, for he sends out vibrations of a higher order than we are able to create. A piece of iron lying on the ground cannot start heat vibrations on its own account, but if it happens to be placed near a fire, it can answer to the heat vibrations of the fire, and thus become hot. When we come near a strong thinker, his vibrations play on our mental bodies, and set up in them corresponding vibrations, so that we vibrate sympathetically with him. For the time being we feel that our mental power is increased, and that we are able to grasp conceptions that normally elude us. But when we are again alone, we find that these very conceptions have become blurred and confused. People will listen to a lecture and follow it intelligently, for the time being understanding the teaching it conveys. They go away satisfied, feeling that they have made a substantial gain in knowledge. On the following day, wishing to share with a friend what had been gained, they find to their mortification that they cannot reproduce the conceptions which seem to be so clear and luminous. Often they will exclaim impatiently, "I am sure I know it. It is there. If I could only get hold of it." This feeling arises from the memory of the vibrations which both mental body and jiva have experienced. There is the consciousness of having realized the conceptions, the memory of the forms taken, and the feeling that, having produced them, reproduction should be easy. But on the previous day it was the masterful vibrations of the stronger thinker that shaped the forms taken by the mental body. They were molded from without, not from within. The sense of inability experienced on the attempt to reproduce them means that this shaping must be done for them a few times before they will have sufficient strength to reproduce those forms by self-initiated vibrations. The knower must have vibrated in these higher ways several times ere he can reproduce the vibrations at will. By virtue of his own inherent nature, he can evolve the power within himself to reproduce them, when he has been made to answer several times by impact from without. The power in both knowers is the same, but one has evolved it, while in the other it is latent. It is brought out of latency by the contact with a similar power already in activity, and thus the stronger quickens the evolution of the weaker. Herein lies one of the values of associating with persons more advanced than ourselves. We profit by their contact, and grow under their stimulating influence. A true teacher will thus aid his disciples far more by keeping them near him than by any spoken words. For this influence, direct personal contact affords the most effective channel. But failing this, or in association with it, much may also be gained from books, if the books be wisely chosen. In reading the work of a really great writer, we should try for the time to put ourselves into a negative or receptive condition, so as to receive as many of his thought vibrations as possible. When we have read the words, we should dwell on them, ponder over them, try to sense the thought they partially express, draw out of them all their hidden relationships. Our attention must be concentrated so as to pierce the mind of the writer through the veil of his words. Such reading serves as an education and helps forward our mental evolution. Less strenuous reading may serve as a pleasant pastime, may store our minds with valuable facts, and so subserve our usefulness. But such reading as is described means a stimulus to our evolution, and should not be neglected by those who seek to grow in order to serve. Chapter 7. Concentration. Few things more tax the powers of the student who is beginning to train his mind than does concentration. In the early stages of the activity of the mind, progress depends on its swift movements, on its alertness, on its readiness to receive impacts from sensation after sensation, turning its attention quickly from one to another. Versatility is, at that stage, a most valuable quality, and the constant turning outwards of the attention is essential to progress. While the mind is collecting materials for thought, extreme mobility is an advantage, and for many, many lives the mind grows through this mobility, and increases it by exercise. The stoppage of this habit of running outwards in every direction, the imposition of fixed attention on a single point, this change naturally comes with a jar and a shock, and the mind plunges wildly, like an unbroken horse when it first feels the bit. We have seen that the mental body is shaped into images of the objects towards which attention is directed. Patanjali speaks of stopping the modifications of the thinking principle, i.e., of stopping these ever-changing reproductions of the outer world. To stop the ever-changing modifications of the mental body, and to keep it shaped to one steady image, is concentration, so far as the form is concerned. To direct the attention steadily to this form, so as to reproduce it perfectly within itself, is concentration so far as the knower is concerned. In concentration, the consciousness is held to a single image, the whole attention of the knower is fixed on a single point, without wavering or swerving. The mind, which runs continually from one thing to another, attracted by external objects, and shaping itself to each in swift succession, is checked, held in, and forced by the will to remain in one form, shaped to one image, disregarding all the impressions thrown upon it. Now, when the mind is thus kept shaped to one image, and the knower steadily contemplates it, he obtains a far fuller knowledge of the object than he could obtain by means of any verbal description of it. Our idea of a picture, of a landscape, is far more complete when we have seen it than when we have only read of it or heard it described. And if we concentrate on such a description, the picture is shaped in the mental body, and we gain a fuller knowledge of it than is gained by mere reading of the words. Words are symbols of things, and concentration on the rough outline of a thing produced by a word descriptive of it fills in more and more detail, as the consciousness comes more closely into touch with the thing described. It must be remembered that concentration is not a state of passivity, but, on the contrary, one of intense and regulated activity. It resembles in the mental world the gathering up of the muscles for a spring in the physical world, or their stiffening to meet a prolonged strain. In fact, this tension always shows itself in a corresponding physical tension with beginners, and physical fatigue follows the exercise of concentration, fatigue of the muscles, not only of the nervous system. As fixing the eye steadily on an object enables us to observe its details, unnoticed in a hasty glance, so does concentration enable us to observe the details of an idea. And as we increase the intensity of the concentration, we take in more in the time, as a runner passes more objects in a minute than does a walker. The walker will expend exactly the same amount of muscular energy in passing 20 objects as will the runner, but the swifter pouring out of energy corresponds to the shorter time of passage. At the beginning of concentration, two difficulties have to be overcome. First, this disregard of the impressions continually being thrown on the mind. The mental body must be prevented from answering these contacts, and the tendency to respond to these outside impressions must be resisted. But this necessitates the partial direction of the attention to the resistance itself, and when the tendency to respond has been overcome, the resistance itself must pass. Perfect balance is needed, neither resistance nor non-resistance, but a steady quietude so strong that waves from outside will not produce any result, not even the secondary result of the consciousness of something to be resisted. Secondly, the mind itself must hold as sole image, for the time, the object of concentration. It must not only refuse to modify itself in response to impacts from without, but must also cease its own inner activity, wherewith it is constantly rearranging its contents, thinking over them, establishing new relations, discovering hidden likenesses and unlikenesses. It has now to confine its attention to a single object, to fix itself on that. It does not, of course, cease its activity, but sends it all along a single channel. Water flowing over a surface wide in comparison with the amount of water will have little motor power. The same water sent along a narrow channel with the same initial impulse will carry away an obstacle. Hence the value of the one-pointedness so continually insisted on by the teachers of meditation. Without adding to the strength of the mind, the effective strength of it is immensely increased. Steam allowed to expand in the free air does not move a midge out of its path, but along a pipe the same steam would drive a piston. This imposition of inner stillness is even more difficult than the ignoring of outside impacts, being concerned with its own deeper and fuller life. To turn the back on the outside world is more easy than to quiet the inner, for this inner world is more identified with the self, and, in fact, to most people at the present stage of evolution, represents the I. The very attempt, however, thus to still the mind soon brings about a step forward in the evolution of consciousness, for we quickly feel that the ruler and the ruled cannot be one, and instinctively identify ourselves with the ruler. I quiet my mind is the expression of the consciousness, and the mind if felt as belonging to, as a possession of, the I. This distinction grows up unconsciously, and the student finds himself becoming conscious of a duality, of something which is controlling and something which is controlled. The lower concrete mind is separated off, and the I is felt as of greater power, clearer vision, and there is evolved a feeling that this I is not dependent on either body or mind. This is the first realization, i.e. feeling, in consciousness of the true immortal nature, already intellectually seen as existing, such vision having, in fact, prompted the very concentration which is thus rewarded. As the practice goes on, the horizon widens out, but as though inwards, not outwards. Inwards and inwards, continually, illimitably. There unfolds a power of knowing truth at sight, which only shows itself when the mind, with its slow processes of reasoning, is transcended. The reader must never forget that the mind is used throughout as meaning the lower mind, the mental body plus manas. For the I is the expression of the self whose nature is knowledge, and whenever he comes into contact with a truth, he finds its vibrations regular and therefore capable of producing a coherent image in himself, whereas the false causes a distorted image, out of proportion, by its very reflection announcing its nature. As the mind assumes a more and more subordinate position, these powers of the ego assert their own predominance, and intuition, analogous to the direct vision of the physical plane, takes the place of reasoning, which may perhaps be compared to the physical plane sense of touch. In fact, the analogy is closer than at the first glance may appear. For intuition develops out of reasoning in the same unbroken manner and without change of essential nature as the I develops out of touch. There is certainly a great change of manner, but this should not blind us to the orderly and sequential evolution. The intuition of the unintelligent is impulse, born of desire, and is lower, not higher, than reasoning. When the mind is well trained in concentrating on an object, and can maintain its one-pointedness, as this state is called, for some little time, the next stage is to drop the object, and to maintain the mind in this attitude of fixed attention, without the attention being directed to anything. In this state the mental body shows no image, its own material is there, held steady and firm, receiving no impressions, in a condition of perfect calm, like a waveless lake. This is not a state which can last for more than a very brief period. Like the critical state of the chemist, the point of contact between two recognized and defined substates of matter. Otherwise put, the consciousness, as the mental body is stilled, escapes from it, and passes into and out of the laya center, the neutral points of contact between the mental body and the causal body. The passage is accompanied by a momentary swoon or loss of consciousness, the inevitable result of the disappearance of objects of consciousness, followed by consciousness in the higher. The dropping out of objects of consciousness belonging to the lower worlds is thus followed by the appearance of objects of consciousness in the higher. Then can the ego shape that mental body according to his own lofty thoughts, and permeate it with his own vibrations. He can mold it after the high visions of the planes beyond his own, that he has caught a glimpse of in his own highest moments, and can thus convey downwards and outwards ideas to which the mental body would otherwise be unable to respond. These are the inspirations of genius, that flash down into the mind with dazzling light, and illuminate a world. The very man who gives them to the world can scarce tell in his ordinary mental state how they have reached him, only he knows that in some strange way the power within me pealing lives on my lip and beckons with my hand. Consciousness is wherever there is an object to which it responds. In the world of form, a form occupies a definite place, and cannot be said to be, if the expression may be pardoned, in a place where it is not. That is, occupying a certain place, it is closer to or more distant from other forms also occupying certain places in relation to its own. If it would change from one place to another, it must cross over the intervening space. The transit may be swift or slow, rapid as the lightning flash, sluggish as the tortoise, but it must be made, and it occupies some time, whether the time be brief or long. Now, with regard to consciousness, space has no such existence. Consciousness changes its state, not its place, and embraces more or less, knows or does not know of that which is not itself, just in proportion as it can or cannot answer to the vibrations of the not-selves. Its horizon enlarges with its receptivity, i.e., with its power of response, with its power to reproduce vibrations. In this there is no question of traveling, of crossing over intermediate intervals. Space belongs to forms, which affect each other most when near each other, and whose power over each other diminishes as their distance from each other increases. All successful students in concentration rediscover for themselves this non-existence of space for consciousness. An adept can acquire knowledge of any object within his limit by concentrating upon it, and distance in no way affects such concentration. He becomes conscious of an object, say on another planet, not because his astral vision acts telescopically, but because in the inner region the whole universe exists as a point. Such a man reaches the heart of life, and sees all things therein. It is written in the Upanishads that within the heart there is a small chamber, and therein is the inner ether, which is coextensive with space. This is the Atma, the Self, immortal, beyond grief. Quote, "Within this abide the sky and the world. Within this abide fire and air, the sun and the moon, the lightning and the stars, all that is and all that is not in this, the universe." Chandogya Upanishad, Volume 3. This, quote, inner ether of the heart is an ancient mystic term descriptive of the subtle nature of the self, which is truly one and all-pervading, so that anyone who is conscious in the self is conscious at all points of the universe. Science says that the movement of a body here affects the farthest star because all bodies are plugged in, interpenetrated by ether, a continuous medium which transmits vibrations without friction, therefore without loss of energy, therefore to any distance. This is on the form side of nature. How natural, then, that consciousness, the life side of nature, should be similarly all-pervading and continuous. We feel ourselves to be here because we are receiving impressions from the objects around us. So, when consciousness vibrates in response to distant objects as fully as to near objects, we feel ourselves to be with them. If consciousness responds to an event taking place in Mars as fully as to an event taking place in our own room, there is no difference in its knowledge of each, and it feels itself as here in each case equally. There is no question of place, but a question of evolution of capacity. The knower is wherever his consciousness can answer, and increase in his power to respond means inclusion within his consciousness of all to which he responds, of all that is within his range of vibration. Here again physical analogy is helpful. The eye sees all which can send into it light vibrations, and nothing else. It can answer only within a certain range of vibrations. All beyond that range, above or below it, is to it darkness. The old Hermetic axiom, as above so below, is a clue in the labyrinth which surrounds us, and by a study of the reflection below we can often learn something of the object above which casts that reflection. One difference between this power of being conscious at any place and going to the higher planes is that in the first case the jiva, whether encased in its lower vehicles or not, feels himself at once in presence of the distant objects, and in the second, clothed in the mental and astral bodies, or in the mental only, travels swiftly from point to point and is conscious of translation. A far more important difference is that in the second case the jiva may find himself in the midst of a crowd of objects which he does not in the least understand, a new and strange world which bewilders and confuses him, while in the first case he understands all he sees, and knows in every case the life as well as the form. Thus studied, the light of the One Self shines through all, and a serene knowledge is enjoyed which can never be gained by spending numberless ages amid the wilderness of forms. Concentration is the means whereby the jiva escapes from the bondage of forms and enters the peace. For him without concentration there is no peace, quoth the teacher, for peace hath her nest on a rock that towers above the tossing waves of form. How to concentrate. Having understood the theory of concentration, the student should begin its practice. If he be of a devotional temperament, his work will be much simplified, for then he can take the object of his devotion as the object of contemplation, and the heart being powerfully attracted to that object, the mind will readily dwell on it, presenting the beloved image without effort and excluding others with equal ease. For the mind is continually impelled by desire, and serves constantly as the minister of pleasure. That which gives pleasure is ever being sought by the mind, and it ever seeks to present images that give pleasure, and to exclude those that give pain. Hence it will dwell on a beloved image, being steadied in that contemplation by the pleasure experienced in it, and if forcibly dragged away from it, will return to it again and again. A devotee can then very readily reach a considerable degree of concentration. He will think of the object of his devotion, creating by the imagination, as clearly as he can, a picture, an image of that object, and he will then keep his mind fixed on that image, on the thought of the beloved. Thus a Christian would think of the Christ, of the Virgin Mother, of his patron saint, of his guardian angel. A Hindu would think of Maheshwara, of Vishnu, of Uma, of Sri Krishna. A Buddhist would think of the Buddha, of the Bodhisattva, a Parsi of Ahura Mazda, of Mithra, and so on. Each and all of these objects appeal to the devotion of the worshipper, and the attraction exercised by them over the heart binds the mind to the happiness-giving object. In this way the mind becomes concentrated with the least exertion, the least loss of effort. Where the temperament is not devotional, the element of attraction can still be utilized as a help, but in this case it will bind to an idea, not to a person. The earliest attempts at concentration should always be made with this help. With the non-devotional, the attractive image will take the form of some profound idea, some high problem. Such should form the object of concentration, and on that the mind should be steadily bent. Herein the binding power of attraction is intellectual interest, the deep desire for knowledge, one of the profoundest loves of man. Another very fruitful form of concentration, for one who is not attracted to a personality as an object of devotion, is to choose a virtue and concentrate upon that. A very real kind of devotion may be aroused by such an object, for it appeals to the heart through the love of intellectual and moral beauty. The virtue should be imaged by the mind in the completest possible way, and when a general view of its effects has been obtained, the mind should be steadied on its essential nature. A great subsidiary advantage of this kind of concentration is that as the mind shapes itself to the virtue and repeats its vibrations, the virtue will gradually become part of the nature and will be firmly established in the character. This shaping of the mind is really an act of self-creation, for the mind after a while falls readily into the forms to which it has been constrained by concentration, and these forms become the organs of its habitual expression. True is it, as written of old, "Man is the creation of thought. What he thinks upon in this life, that hereafter he becomes." Chandogya Upanishad, Volume 3. When the mind loses hold of its object, whether devotional or intellectual, as it will do, time after time, it must be brought back, and again directed to the object. Often at first it will wander away without the wandering being noticed, and the student suddenly awakes to the fact that he is thinking about something quite other than the proper object of thought. This will happen again and again, and he must patiently bring it back, a wearisome and tiring process, but there is no other way by which concentration can be gained. It is a useful and instructive mental exercise, when the mind has thus slipped away without notice, to take it back again by the road along which it traveled in its strayings. This process increases the control of the rider over his runaway horse, and thus diminishes its inclination to escape. Consecutive thinking, though a step towards concentration, is not identical with it, for in consecutive thinking the mind passes from one to another of a sequence of images, and is not fixed on one alone. But, as it is far easier than concentration, the beginner may use it to lead up to the more difficult task. It is often helpful for a devotee to select a scene from the life of the object of his devotion, and to picture the scene vividly in its details, with local surroundings of landscape and color. Thus the mind is gradually steadied on one line, and it can be led to and finally fixed on the central figure of the scene, the object of devotion. As the scene is reproduced in the mind, it takes on a feeling of reality, and it is quite possible in this way to get into magnetic touch with the record of that scene on a higher plane, the permanent photograph of it in the cosmic ether, and thus to obtain very much more knowledge of it than is supplied by any description of it that may have been given. Thus also may the devotee come into magnetic touch with the object of devotion, and enter by this direct touch into far more intimate relations with him than are otherwise possible. For consciousness is not under the physical space limitations, but is wheresoever it is conscious. a statement that has already been explained. Concentration itself, however, it must be remembered, is not this sequential thinking, and the mind must finally be fastened to the one object and remain fixed thereunto, not reasoning on it, but, as it were, sucking out, absorbing its content. Chapter 8. Obstacles to Concentration. Wandering Minds. The universal complaint which comes from those who are beginning to practice concentration is that the very attempt to concentrate results in a greater restlessness of the mind. To some extent this is true, for the law of action and reaction works here as everywhere, and the pressure put on the mind causes a corresponding reaction. But while admitting this, we find, on closer study, that the increased restlessness is largely illusory. The feeling of such increased restlessness is chiefly due to the opposition suddenly set up between the ego, willing steadiness, and the mind in its normal condition of mobility. The ego has, for a long series of lives, been carried about by the mind in all its swift movements, as a man is ever being carried through space by the whirling earth. He is not conscious of movement, he does not know that the world is moving, so thoroughly is he part of it, moving as it moves. If he were able to separate himself from the earth, and stop his own movement without being shivered into pieces, he would only then be conscious that the earth was moving at a high rate of speed. So long as a man is yielding to every movement of the mind, he does not realize its continual activity and restlessness, but when he steadies himself, when he ceases to move, then he feels the ceaseless motion of the mind he has hitherto obeyed. If the beginner knows these facts, he will not be discouraged at the very commencement of his efforts by meeting with this universal experience, but will, taking it for granted, go quietly on with his task. And, after all, he is but repeating the experience voiced by Arjuna 5,000 years ago. Quote, "This yoga which thou hast declared to be by equanimity, O slayer of Madhu, I see no stable foundation for it, owing to restlessness, for the mind is verily restless, O Krishna. It is impetuous, strong, and difficult to bend. I deem it as hard to curb as the wind." And still is true the answer pointing out the only way to success. Quote, "Without doubt, O mighty armed, the mind is hard to curb and restless, but it may be curbed by constant practice and by indifference." End quote. Bhagavad Gita. The mind thus steadied will not be so easily thrown off its balance by the wandering thoughts from other minds, ever seeking to effect a lodgment, the vagrant crowd which continually encircles us. The mind used to concentration retains always a certain positiveness, and is not readily shaped by unlicensed intruders. All people who are training their minds should maintain an attitude of steady watchfulness with regard to the thoughts that come into the mind, and should exercise towards them a constant selection. The refusal to harbor evil thoughts, their prompt ejection if they effect an entry, the immediate replacement of an evil thought by a good one of the opposite character, this practice will so tune the mind that after a time it will act automatically, repelling the evil of its own accord. Harmonious, rhythmical vibrations repel the inharmonious and irregular. They fly off from the rhythmically vibrating surface as a stone that strikes against a whirling wheel. Living, as we all do, in a continual current of thoughts, good and evil, we need to cultivate the selective action of the mind, so that the good may be automatically drawn in, the evil automatically repelled. The mind is like a magnet, attracting and repelling, and the nature of its attractions and repulsions can be determined by ourselves. If we watch the thoughts which come into our minds, we shall find that they are of the same kind as those which we habitually encourage. The mind attracts the thoughts which are congruous with its normal activities. If we, then, for a time, deliberately practice selection, the mind will soon do this selection for itself on the lines laid down for it, and so evil thoughts will not penetrate into the mind, while the good will ever find an open door. Most people are only too receptive, but the receptivity is due to feebleness, not to deliberate self-surrender to the higher influences. It is, therefore, well to learn how we may render ourselves normally positive, and how we may become negative when we decide that it is desirable that we should be so. The habit of concentration will by itself tend to strengthen the mind, so that it will readily exercise control and selection with regard to the thoughts that come to it from outside, and it has already been stated how it can be trained automatically to repel the bad. But it may be well to add to what has been said that when an evil thought enters the mind, it is better not to fight with it directly, but to utilize the fact that the mind can only think of one thing at a time. Let the mind be at once turned to a good thought, and the evil one will be necessarily expelled. In fighting against anything, the very force we send out causes a corresponding reaction, and thus increases our trouble, whereas the turning of the mental eye to an image in a different direction causes the other image to drop silently from the field of vision. Many a man wastes years in combating impure thoughts, when quiet occupation of the mind with pure ones would leave no room for his assailants. Further, as the mind thus draws to itself matter which does not respond to the evil, he is gradually becoming positive, unreceptive to that kind of thought. This is the secret of right receptivity. The mind responds according to its constitution. It answers to all that is of like nature with itself. We make it positive towards evil, negative towards good, by habitual good thinking, thus building into its very fabric materials that are receptive of good, unreceptive of evil. We must think of that which we desire to receive, and refuse to think of that which we desire not to receive. Such a mind, in the thought ocean which surrounds it, draws to itself the good thoughts, repels the evil, and thus ever grows purer and stronger amid the very same thought conditions which render another fouler and weaker. The method of replacing one thought by another is one that may be utilized to great advantage in many ways. If an unkind thought about another person enters the mind, it should at once be replaced by a thought of some virtue he possesses, of some good action he has done. If the mind is harassed by anxiety, turn it to the thought of the purpose that runs through life, the good law, which mightily and sweetly ordereth all things. If a particular kind of undesirable thought persistently obtrude itself, then it is wise to provide a special weapon. Some verse or phrase that embodies the opposite idea should be chosen, and whenever the objectionable thought presents itself, this phrase should be repeated and dwelt upon. In a week or two the thought will cease to trouble. It is a good plan constantly to furnish the mind with some high thought, some word of cheer, some inspiration to noble living. Ere we go forth into life's turmoil, day by day, we should give the mind this shield of good thought. A few words are enough, taken from some scripture of the race, and this, fixed in the mind by a few recitations in the early morning, will recur to the mind again and again during the day, and will be found repeating itself in the mind whenever the mind is disengaged. The dangers of concentration. There are certain dangers connected with the practice of concentration, as to which the beginner should be warned. For many eager students, in their wish to go far, go too fast, and so hinder themselves instead of helping. The body is apt to suffer owing to the ignorance and inattention of the student. When a man concentrates his mind, his body puts itself into a state of tension, and this is not noticed by him, is involuntary so far as he is concerned. This following of the mind by the body may be noticed in very many trivial things. An effort to remember causes a wrinkling of the forehead, the eyes are fixed, and the eyebrows drawn down. Tense attention is accompanied by fixity of the eyes, anxiety by an eager, wistful gaze. For ages, effort of the mind has been followed by effort of the body, the mind being directed entirely towards the supply of bodily needs by bodily exertions, and thus an association has been set up, which works automatically. When concentration is commenced, the body, according to its wont, follows the mind, and the muscles become rigid and the nerves tense. Hence great physical fatigue, muscular and nervous exhaustion, acute headache are very apt to follow in the wake of concentration, and thus people are led to give it up, believing that these ill effects are inevitable. As a matter of fact, they can be avoided by a simple precaution. The beginner should now and again break off his concentration sufficiently to notice the state of his body, and if he finds it strained, tense, or rigid, he should at once relax it. When this has been done several times, the links of association will be broken, and the body will remain pliant and resting while the mind is concentrated. Patanjali said that in meditation the posture adopted should be easy and pleasant. The body cannot help the mind by its tension, and it injures itself. Perhaps a personal anecdote may be pardoned as an illustration. One day, while under H. P. Blavatsky's training, I was desired by her to make an effort of the will. I did do so with much intensity, and with the result of much swelling in the blood vessels of the head. "My dear," she said dryly, "you do not will with your blood vessels." Another physical danger arises from the effect produced by concentration on the nerve cells of the brain. As the power of concentration increases, as the mind is stilled, and the ego begins to work through the mind, he makes a new demand on the brain nerve cells. These cells are, of course, ultimately constituted of atoms, and the walls of these atoms consist of whorls of spiralae through which run currents of life energy. Of these spiralae there are 7 sets, 4 only of which are in use. The remaining 3 are as yet unused, practically rudimentary organs. As the higher energies pour down, seeking a channel in the atoms, the set of spiralae which, later in evolution, will serve as their channel, is forced into activity. If this be done very slowly and carefully, no harm results. But overpressure means injury to the delicate structure of the spiralae. These minute delicate tubes, when unused, have their sides in contact, like tubes of soft India rubber. If the sides are violently forced apart, rupture is apt to result. The feeling of dullness and heaviness all over the brain is the danger signal. If this be disregarded, acute pain will follow, and obstinate inflammation may ensue. Concentration should therefore be practiced very sparingly at first, and should never be carried to the point of brain fatigue. A few minutes at a time is enough for a beginning, the time being lengthened gradually as the practice goes on. But, however short the time which is given to it, it should be given regularly. If a day's practice be missed, the previous condition of the atom reasserts itself, and the work has to be recommenced. Steady and regular, but not prolonged, practice ensures the best results and avoids danger. In some schools of what is called Hatha Yoga, the students are recommended to assist concentration by fixing the eyes on a black spot on a white wall, and to maintain this fixity of gaze until trance supervenes. Now, there are 2 reasons why this should not be done. First, the practice, after a while, injures the physical sight, and the eyes lose their power of adjustment. Secondly, it brings about a form of brain paralysis. This begins with the fatigue of the retinal cells as the waves of light beat on them, and the spot disappears from view, the place on the retina where its image is formed becoming insensitive, the result of prolonged response. This fatigue spreads inwards until finally a kind of paralysis supervenes, and the person passes into a hypnotic trance. In fact, excessive stimulation of a sense organ is, in the West, a recognized means for producing hypnosis, the revolving mirror, the electric light, etc., being used with this object. But brain paralysis not only stops all thinking on the physical plane, but renders the brain insensitive to non-physical vibrations, so that the ego cannot impress it. It does not set him free, but merely deprives him of his instrument. A man may remain for weeks in a trance thus induced, but when he awakes, he is no wiser than at the beginning of the trance. He has not gained knowledge. He has merely wasted time. Such methods do not gain spiritual power, but merely bring about physical disability. Meditation. Meditation may be said to have been already explained, for it is only the sustained attitude of the concentrated mind in face of an object of devotion, of a problem that needs illumination to be intelligible, of anything whereof the life is to be realized and absorbed rather than the form. Meditation cannot be effectively performed until concentration is, at least partially, mastered. For concentration is not an end, but a means to an end. It fashions the mind into an instrument which can be used at the will of the owner. When a concentrated mind is steadily directed to any object with the view of piercing the veil and reaching the life, and drawing that life into union with the life to which the mind belongs, then meditation is performed. Concentration might be regarded as the shaping of the organ, meditation as its exercise. The mind has been made one-pointed. It is then directed to and dwells steadily on any object of which knowledge is desired. Anyone who determines to lead a spiritual life must daily devote some time to meditation. As soon may the physical life be sustained without food as the spiritual without meditation. Those who cannot spare half an hour a day during which the world may be shut out and the mind may receive from the spiritual planes a current of life cannot lead the spiritual life. Only to the mind concentrated, steady, shut out from the world, can the divine reveal itself. God shows himself and his universe in endless forms, but within the human heart he shows himself in his life and nature, revealing himself to that which is a fragment of himself. In that silence, peace and strength and force flow into the soul, and the man of meditation is ever the most efficient man of the world. Lord Rosebery, speaking of Cromwell, described him as a practical mystic, and declared that a practical mystic is the greatest force in the world. It is true. The concentrated intelligence, the power of withdrawing outside the turmoil, mean immensely increased energy and work, mean steadiness, self-control, serenity. The man of meditation is the man who wastes no time, scatters no energy, misses no opportunity. Such a man governs events, because within him is the power whereof events are only the outer expression. He shares the divine life, and therefore shares the divine power. End of chapter 8.